Yo, why is there a monkey on my field?
That's what a white army sergeant shouted when he saw a black woman walking along the edge of his training grounds, in front of 40 recruits, on a United States military base. She didn't blink, she didn't move.
Take your nappy-head self back to whatever welfare line you crawled out of.
A recruit in the back started beating his chest like an ape. The whole platoon laughed. She looked him dead in the eye. No tears, no shaking.
You're gonna regret this, Sergeant.
Regret what? Putting a street rat back where she belongs?
She said nothing. She just pulled out a small notebook and started writing. But he was still laughing. He had no idea that laugh had an expiration date. 5:45 in the morning. Fort Davis, Texas. The kind of army base that sits in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by flat brown earth and heat that hits you before the sun even rises. Most of the base was still quiet. A few lights flickered in the barracks. Somewhere in the distance, boots crunched on gravel. The smell of diesel and dust hung in the air like it had been there for decades. In a small officer's quarter at the far edge of the base, a woman was already awake. Lorraine Moore stood in front of a narrow mirror, smoothing the creases of a plain gray pullover. No uniform, no medals, no stars, just a woman in joggers and sneakers, looking like she was about to go for a morning run. But on the nightstand beside her bed sat something most people on this base would never see up close. A small velvet box. Inside it, a single silver star, the insignia of a brigadier general in the United States Army. Next to the box, a folder stamped "Confidential" in red ink. She had read it 3 times already, every page, every complaint, every name. Fort Davis had a problem, and the Pentagon sent her to find out how deep it went. See, for the past 2 years, soldiers at this base had been filing complaints. Black soldiers, Latino soldiers, all of them saying the same thing. Racial slurs during training, harassment in the barracks, punishments handed out based on skin color, not performance. 3 formal complaints had been filed against one man in particular, Sergeant First Class Craig Henderson, senior drill instructor, the loudest voice on the base and the most protected one, too. Every single complaint was dismissed. The officers above Henderson called the accusers too sensitive. One black soldier who refused to drop his complaint was quietly discharged. No investigation, no hearing, just gone. That's why Lorraine was here. Not in a convoy, not with her rank on display. She came alone, in civilian clothes, no escort, no announcement. She wanted to see Fort Davis the way a black woman with no stars on her shoulders would see it. She wanted to know what happened when nobody important was watching. She tucked the folder into a locked drawer. She left the star on the nightstand. She grabbed a small notebook, slipped it into her pocket, and walked out the door. The morning air hit her skin like a warm, damp cloth. Texas humidity. The kind that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've taken 10 steps. She walked along a dirt path that cut between supply buildings and motor pools. A couple of soldiers passed her. One glanced sideways. The other didn't even look. To them, she was nobody. Maybe a civilian contractor. Maybe someone's wife. Either way, not worth a salute. She kept walking. Past the mess hall where the smell of powdered eggs and burned coffee drifted through the screen doors. Past the admin building where a flag hung limp in the still air. Past a row of parked Humvees coated in red dust. And then she heard it. The sound she had come for. A voice, loud, sharp, cutting through the morning like a blade. Sergeant Craig Henderson was already on the training field. His platoon of 40 recruits stood in formation, rigid and silent. Henderson paced in front of them like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. He was a big man, broad shoulders, thick neck, a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of concrete. His voice didn't just carry, it invaded. Every word was a command, even when he wasn't giving one. The recruits feared him. That was obvious. You could see it in how they stood. Spines too straight, eyes too wide, hands pressed flat against their thighs like they were afraid to move. Among them stood Private Elise Sutton, 22 years old, blonde hair pulled tight under her cap. She was one of the few female recruits in the platoon, and she had learned early to keep her head down and her mouth shut. She had seen things, heard things, but she never said a word, because on Craig Henderson's field, silence wasn't a choice. It was survival. Lorraine reached the edge of the training area and stopped. She stood near the fence line, notebook in hand, watching. That's when Henderson saw her. Henderson stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked onto Lorraine like a dog spotting a rabbit in its yard. For a second, he just stared. His brain was doing the math. Black woman, civilian clothes, no badge visible, no escort, standing near his training field with a notebook. He didn't like any part of that equation. He turned to his platoon. Hold formation. Then he started walking toward her. Not fast, not slow. The kind of walk that says, I'm coming, and you better have an answer ready. His boots hit the dirt with heavy, deliberate thuds, each step louder than the last. 40 sets of eyes followed him. Nobody breathed. He stopped about 3 feet from Lorraine, close enough for her to smell the coffee on his breath, close enough for her to see the vein pulsing on the side of his neck. This is a restricted training area. His voice was flat, cold. You need to turn around right now. Lorraine didn't step back. She reached for the military-affiliated ID lanyard hanging inside her pullover and held it up. I have authorization to be here. Henderson snatched it out of her hand. He held it up to the light like he was examining a fake dollar bill. His eyes scanned it for maybe 2 seconds. Then he tossed it back at her. It hit her chest and dangled. I don't care what little badge you got. Civilians don't walk my field. Lorraine caught the lanyard. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her face didn't change. She clipped it back inside her pullover and said, I'm not a civilian, Sergeant. He leaned in, so close she could count the pores on his nose. You look like one to me. Then he turned around and walked back toward his platoon. That's when he delivered the line that would follow him for the rest of his life. Yo, why is there a monkey on my field? He said it at full volume, arms spread wide, a showman performing for his audience. And his audience delivered. Nervous laughter from some, full-throated howling from others. Private First Class Dylan Tate, a scrawny kid with a buzz cut and a permanent smirk, doubled over laughing like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Tate was Henderson's shadow, 21 years old, eager to impress. The kind of kid who didn't have his own personality, so he borrowed Henderson's. Whatever Henderson hated, Tate hated louder. From the back row, someone started making ape sounds. Ooh, ooh, ah, ah. Low at first, then louder. A few others joined in. The sound carried across the field like a chant. Lorraine stood still. Her hands hung at her sides. Her breathing stayed even. Steady in, steady out. The only movement was her eyes. They swept across the platoon like a camera recording every face. Private Elise Sutton stood in the second row. She wasn't laughing. Her jaw was clamped so tight the muscles in her neck were visible. Her eyes were fixed on the ground in front of her boots. She wanted to disappear. Henderson walked back toward Lorraine, this time faster. The entertainment portion was over. Now came the intimidation. I told you once. I'm not telling you again. He pointed toward the road behind her. Walk, now. Lorraine didn't walk. She opened her notebook and started writing. Henderson's face changed. The amusement drained out of it. What replaced it was something darker, something territorial. What are you doing? What is that? He reached out and snatched the notebook from her hands, flipped through the pages. His eyes scanned her handwriting. Names, times, descriptions. You writing a report? His voice dropped. Who sent you? Who do you think you are? Lorraine extended her hand, palm open. Return my notebook, Sergeant. That's not a request. He stared at her hand. Then he looked at the notebook. Then he tore a page out of it. Clean, deliberate. The sound of ripping paper cut through the silence like a gunshot. He dropped the torn page on the ground between them, right at her feet. Pick it up. The platoon went quiet. Even Tate stopped smirking. Something about the way Henderson said it, low, slow, full of venom, made the air feel heavier. Lorraine looked down at the page. Then she looked back at Henderson. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not anger, something colder, something patient. She bent down, picked up the page, folded it neatly, and placed it in her pocket. Every single thing happening right now is being noted. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, like a doctor delivering bad news. Henderson mimicked her voice in a high-pitched whine. Every single thing is being noted. He turned to the platoon with his arms out. You hear that, boys? We got ourselves an inspector. The platoon erupted, laughter, clapping. Someone whistled. That's when Dylan Tate decided to step forward. He walked right up to Lorraine like he'd been waiting for his turn. Ma'am, he drew the word out slow, dripping with sarcasm. I think you might be lost. This ain't a place for someone like you. Lorraine looked at him. Someone like me. Yeah, Tate grinned, proud of himself. Maybe try the cleaning crew office. That's probably more your speed. A wave of laughter rippled through the platoon. Henderson nodded at Tate like a proud father watching his son hit a home run. Another recruit chimed in from the formation. Or maybe she's looking for the zoo. More laughter, louder now, feeding on itself. Lorraine didn't respond to any of them. She turned back to Henderson. Her voice hadn't changed, not once throughout this entire exchange. I need my notebook back, Sergeant. Henderson looked at the notebook still in his hand. He held it up between two fingers like it was a piece of trash. Then he dropped it on the ground. There you go. Fetch. The word hung in the air. Fetch. Like she was a dog. Like she was less than human. Like everything about her, her skin, her presence, her existence on his field, was an offense he had every right to punish. Lorraine picked up the notebook. She brushed the dust off its cover with her thumb. She opened it to a clean page and wrote something down. Slowly, carefully, like she had all the time in the world. Henderson watched her write. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not doubt, not fear, but the smallest crack of uncertainty. The tiniest voice asking, why isn't she afraid? He killed it immediately, shoved it down, replaced it with volume. All right, show's over. He clapped his hands twice. Back in formation. We got real soldiers to train. He turned his back on Lorraine and marched toward the platoon. Tate followed. The recruits snapped back into their lines. Lorraine remained where she was, standing at the edge of the field, notebook in hand, pen still moving. She looked up one last time, not at Henderson, not at Tate. She looked at the platoon, at all 40 of them, at the ones who laughed, at the ones who stayed silent, at Elise Sutton, whose eyes finally lifted from the ground just long enough to meet hers. In that half-second glance, something passed between them. Lorraine gave a small nod, almost invisible. Then she looked back down at her notebook and kept writing. The morning sun climbed higher over Fort Davis. The heat was building, the dust was rising, and somewhere on that field, a sergeant was barking orders at his men like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that couldn't be unwritten, couldn't be unlaughed, couldn't be taken back. Henderson just didn't know it yet. Henderson wasn't done. A woman had walked onto his field, stood her ground, and didn't break. That wasn't something his ego could swallow. He pulled the radio off his belt, pressed the button. His voice came through, clear and sharp. This is Sergeant First Class Henderson on Training Field Alpha. I've got an unauthorized civilian trespassing on restricted grounds. Black female, no visible credentials. She's been taking notes and observing troop formations. Could be a security threat. Requesting military police immediately. He let go of the button and clipped the radio back. Then he turned to Tate with a grin that said, "Watch this." Tate grinned back, the kind of grin that makes your stomach turn. Lorraine heard every word of that radio call. She was still standing near the fence line, still holding her notebook, still writing. Her pen didn't stop, her hand didn't shake, but her jaw tightened. Just barely. Just enough to notice if you were looking close. She wasn't surprised. She had read the files. She knew exactly what kind of man Craig Henderson was. What surprised her was how fast he escalated, how comfortable he was doing it in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. That told her everything she needed to know about this base. 2 MP vehicles rolled onto the field within 4 minutes, red and blue lights flashing against the dusty morning air, tires crunching gravel, doors swinging open before the engines fully stopped. 4 military police officers stepped out, 2 from each vehicle. They walked toward Lorraine with their hands resting on their belts, not on their weapons, but close enough to send a message. Henderson intercepted them before they reached her. He spoke fast, loud, pointing at Lorraine like she was evidence at a crime scene. "She's been out here for 20 minutes. Wouldn't leave when I told her to. She was writing down troop positions, taking notes on our formations. I don't know who she is, but she's got no business being here." One of the MPs, Corporal Adams, nodded and walked toward Lorraine. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-20s, clean-shaven. His eyes were careful, cautious, not hostile, not yet. "Ma'am, I need to see your identification." Lorraine unclipped her lanyard and handed it over. No resistance, no attitude, just calm, quiet cooperation. Adams looked at the ID. He read it once. Then he read it again. His eyebrows pulled together. Something about the access level printed on the card didn't match what Henderson had described. This wasn't a civilian contractor badge. This was something higher, much higher. He opened his mouth to say something, but Henderson cut him off. "Just get her out of here, Corporal. She's disrupting my training and I want her off this field. Now!" Adams hesitated. He looked at the ID one more time. Then he looked at Henderson. Then back at Lorraine. The second MP, older, thicker, less patient, stepped forward. He didn't look at the ID. He didn't ask questions. He just pointed at the hood of the vehicle. "Ma'am, hands on the vehicle. We need to do a pat-down." Lorraine looked at him, steady, direct. "I do not consent to this search. I have valid credentials. You are making a mistake." The older MP didn't blink. "Hands on the vehicle, ma'am. We can sort out credentials after." Lorraine placed her hands flat on the hood. The metal was already warm from the Texas sun. She could feel the heat soaking through her palms. Behind her, she heard Henderson chuckle. The pat-down was slow, methodical, unnecessarily thorough. The MP's hands moved across her shoulders, down her sides, along her waist. Every movement deliberate, every second stretched. Her pockets were emptied one by one, items placed on the hood in a neat little row like evidence at a trial. A phone, the notebook, a pen, a laminated prayer card with a crease down the middle from years of folding, and a small brass coin. Henderson walked over and picked up the coin. He turned it over between his fingers. On one side, an eagle. On the other, a single star. A general's challenge coin. The kind of thing you don't buy at a gift shop. The kind of thing that's handed to you by someone with enough power to reshape your entire world. Henderson didn't recognize it, didn't care to. "What's this? Some kind of souvenir?" From the sidelines, Tate yelled out, "Probably got it from a pawn shop." A few recruits laughed, softer now. The presence of MPs had cooled some of the bravery. Henderson tossed the coin back onto the hood. It landed with a dull clink next to her phone. The older MP opened the rear door of the vehicle. "Ma'am, we're going to hold you here while we verify your credentials." Lorraine turned and looked at Adams. Just Adams. "Corporal, I want it officially on record that I did not consent to this search, that I presented valid identification, and that I was detained despite full cooperation." Adams swallowed. His pen hovered over his notepad. He nodded, wrote something down. His hand was trembling. Lorraine sat in the back of the MP vehicle. The door closed. The air inside was stale and hot. The seat smelled like sweat and synthetic leather. Through the window, she could see Henderson standing with his arms folded, Tate next to him, both of them smiling. Henderson raised his hand. Tate slapped it. A high five, casual, celebratory, like they'd just won a game. The recruits had broken formation. Some were standing in clusters, whispering. Others were watching the MP vehicle, trying to see through the tinted glass. Elise Sutton stood apart from all of them, arms crossed, face pale. She looked like she was going to be sick. Inside the vehicle, Lorraine sat with perfect posture, spine straight, shoulders back, hands flat on her knees. She didn't fidget, she didn't pace, she didn't mutter to herself. She reached for her phone. It had been returned to her after the search. She unlocked it with her thumb and opened her messages. She typed one text, short, direct, sent it without hesitation. She didn't look at the screen again. She placed the phone face down on the seat beside her and looked out the window. Henderson was back on the field, barking at his recruits, business as usual, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just called a woman a monkey, torn her notebook, ordered her searched, and had her locked in the back of a police car. Lorraine watched him. Her face was still, her eyes were sharp, and under her breath so quiet that not even the microphone in the vehicle's dash cam could pick it up, she whispered 3 words. All of it. Every sound, every slur, every laugh. Her phone had been recording since the moment Henderson first opened his mouth. The platoon went back to drills. Henderson's voice echoed across the field, sharp, loud, untouchable. But 3 black SUVs were already on their way, and they weren't coming for an inspection anymore. They were coming for him. 18 minutes. That's how long it took. 18 minutes from the moment Lorraine pressed send to the moment the ground beneath Craig Henderson's feet cracked wide open. The first sign was the sound, a low rumble, distant at first, like thunder rolling across flat Texas land. But the sky was clear. Not a single cloud. Henderson heard it too. He paused mid-sentence, turned his head toward the main road that led into the base. 3 black SUVs, tinted windows, government plates, moving fast, moving in formation. The lead vehicle had a small flag mounted on the front fender. Most soldiers would never get close enough to see what was on that flag. But if you knew what to look for, you'd know exactly what it meant. Stars. The vehicles didn't slow down at the gate. They didn't stop for checkpoints. They rolled straight through like the road had been cleared for them. Because it had. They pulled up to the edge of Training Field Alpha. Doors opened simultaneously, 3 from each vehicle, 9 people total, all in uniform, all moving with purpose. From the lead SUV stepped Staff Sergeant Brenda Collins, tall, sharp jawline, posture so perfect it looked like her spine had been replaced with a steel rod. She wore her dress uniform, pressed, perfect, every crease a straight line. Behind her, 2 officers in full service dress. Behind them, armed escort. Military police, real ones, not the base-level MPs who had fumbled Lorraine's ID 20 minutes ago. Collins walked straight past Henderson, didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, walked past the platoon, past Tate, past every single recruit standing frozen in formation. She stopped at the MP vehicle, opened the rear door. Lorraine was sitting exactly where she had been, same posture, same calm, same steady eyes. Collins stood at attention and spoke clearly, loud enough for every person on that field to hear. "General Moore, are you all right, ma'am?" General. The word hit the field like a bomb with no sound, just a shockwave, pure, invisible, devastating. Henderson's smile didn't fade. It collapsed, like a building losing its foundation floor by floor. His lips stayed open, but no sound came out. His arms dropped to his sides. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. Corporal Adams, the young MP who had hesitated, snapped to attention so hard his heels cracked against the ground. His hand flew to his forehead in a salute. His eyes were wide. His face said everything his mouth couldn't. Tate took a step backward, then another, like he was trying to quietly disappear from a room he should never have entered. Collins continued. She turned to face the field. Every recruit, every MP, every single person standing on that dirt. "This is Brigadier General Lorraine Moore. She is here under direct orders from the Pentagon to conduct an unannounced readiness and conduct inspection of this installation." She paused, let the words land. General Moore holds the highest operational authority on this base. She outranks every single person standing here, including your commanding officer. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind you can feel pressing against your chest. A hot breeze rolled across the field. Dust kicked up around their boots. Somewhere behind the barracks, a door slammed. Nobody flinched. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loud enough to hear. Lorraine stepped out of the vehicle, slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. She straightened her pullover, brushed a smudge of dust off her sleeve, picked up her notebook and her challenge coin from the hood of the MP car. She looked at Henderson, not with rage, not with satisfaction, not with any emotion that he could grab onto and use to make himself feel less small. She looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a tumor, clinical, precise, already planning the removal. Sergeant First Class Craig Henderson. He flinched at his own name. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Her voice was level, low, every word chosen like a scalpel. Do not speak. Do not move. You will remain here until you are formally escorted to the Provost Marshal's office. Henderson's mouth opened. Reflex, survival instinct. His lips formed the beginning of a word. Maybe general, maybe I, maybe please. Lorraine raised one finger, just one. I said do not speak. His mouth closed. His chin dropped. His shoulders, those big, broad, intimidating shoulders that had towered over everyone on this field for years, folded inward like wet cardboard. Lorraine turned to Tate. He was standing 5 meters away, pale as paper, eyes darting left and right like a trapped animal looking for an exit that didn't exist. Private First Class Tate, you are to report to Colonel Drake's office within the hour. Non-negotiable. Tate nodded. Fast, frantic, like a child caught stealing and trying to agree his way out of punishment. Lorraine looked at the platoon one final time. 40 faces, some terrified, some ashamed, some staring at the ground like it might open up and swallow them whole. She didn't yell, she didn't lecture. She just tucked the notebook under her arm and walked toward the command building. Collins fell into step beside her. The officers followed. Behind them, Henderson stood alone on his field. The field, he said, was his. The field he owned. The field where he was king. He wasn't king anymore. Henderson broke within 30 seconds of Lorraine walking away. His knees didn't buckle, his body didn't collapse, but something inside him did. You could see it in his face. The jaw that had been clenched tight all morning went slack. The eyes that had burned with authority turned glassy, wet. He took one step forward, then stopped, like a dog that had been yanked back by its chain. General! His voice cracked on the first syllable. General Moore, please, I didn't know. I swear to God, if I had known who you were. Lorraine stopped walking. She didn't turn around immediately. She let the silence sit. Let it fill the space between them. Let every single person on that field feel the weight of what he just said. Then she turned, slowly. If you had known. She repeated his words back to him, flat, quiet. If you had known who I was, you would have been respectful. That's what you're telling me. Henderson nodded, desperate, fast. That's the problem, Sergeant. She held his gaze. Respect shouldn't require a rank. The words cut through him cleaner than any punishment ever could. His face twisted. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled out of water. Sweat ran down his temples. His hands, the same hands that had snatched her notebook, torn her page, tossed her challenge coin like garbage, were trembling at his sides. He had nothing, no excuse, no defense, no authority left to hide behind. 20 meters away, Dylan Tate was trying to disappear. He had been slowly backing away from the formation since Collins said the word general. Step by step, inch by inch, trying to blend into the background like he hadn't been front and center for every insult. Collins spotted him before he made it 10 feet. Private! Her voice was a whip crack. You were instructed to report to Colonel Drake. That was not a suggestion. Where exactly do you think you're going? Tate froze. His face was white. His lips were dry. He licked them twice before he could speak. Staff Sergeant, I was just following along. It was all just a joke. I didn't mean... Lorraine didn't even look at him. She spoke over her shoulder, still facing Henderson. A joke? You made ape noises at a decorated officer. You told her to join the cleaning crew. You said she got her credentials from a pawn shop. She paused. We'll discuss what qualifies as humor at your hearing, Private. Tate's legs nearly gave out. He grabbed the arm of the recruit standing next to him to steady himself. The recruit pulled away from him like he was contagious. Nobody wanted to stand near Dylan Tate anymore. From the second row of the formation, a figure stepped forward. Quiet, deliberate, every head turned. Private Elise Sutton. She walked past the front row, past Tate, past the MPs still standing near their vehicles. She walked directly to Staff Sergeant Collins and stood at attention. Staff Sergeant, I want to make a formal statement. I witnessed everything that happened this morning. From the first word to the last. I'll testify, under oath, whatever you need. Collins looked at her. A beat of silence passed between them. Then Collins gave a single nod. Noted, Private. We'll take your statement within the hour. Sutton didn't move immediately. She stood there for a moment. Her chin lifted slightly. Her hands stopped shaking. Something had shifted behind her eyes. Relief. Or maybe something bigger. Maybe it was the first time in months she didn't feel like a coward. She turned and walked back toward the formation. Every recruit she passed looked at her differently now. Some with confusion, some with resentment. But a few, quietly, carefully, looked at her with something close to respect. 2 fresh MPs arrived, not Corporal Adams, not the older one who had searched Lorraine. 2 new officers, clean uniforms, firm expressions, no hesitation. They flanked Henderson, 1 on each side. Sergeant, come with us. Henderson looked at the platoon, his platoon, the men he had trained, the men he had controlled, the men who had laughed at every word he said for years. Not one of them looked back at him. He lowered his head. His boots dragged through the dirt as the MPs walked him off the field. The sound was slow, heavy, final, like a door being closed that would never open again. Lorraine watched from the steps of the command building, arms folded, face still. Then she turned and walked inside. She had work to do. Colonel Nathan Drake was waiting in the command building when Lorraine walked through the door. He stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. 53 years old, silver at the temples, 2 decades of service. And right now his face looked like a man watching his house burn down from the inside. General Moore. His voice was thin, tight. I just received the preliminary report from Staff Sergeant Collins. I want you to know, I had no knowledge of what was happening on that field this morning. Lorraine sat down across from his desk. She placed her notebook on the table, opened it to the first page. Every entry written in clean, precise handwriting. Times, names, quotes, actions, all of it documented to the minute. Colonel Drake, what happened on that field this morning is not an isolated incident, and I think you know that. Drake's jaw tightened. He didn't argue. Lorraine continued. I was sent here because the Pentagon has received multiple reports of racial misconduct at this installation. 3 formal complaints were filed against Sergeant Henderson over the past 2 years. All 3 were dismissed without investigation. She let that sit for a moment. I need to understand how that happened, and I need to understand it today. Drake nodded. He picked up his phone and called the base provost marshal. Within the hour, a formal inquiry was opened. Within 2 hours, the investigation team had assembled in the main conference room. But the real blow came when Lorraine placed her phone on the table and pressed play. The recording was 26 minutes long, crystal clear, every word captured from the moment Henderson first approached her on the field. The room listened in silence. Henderson's voice filled the conference room. Why is there a monkey on my field? The laughter that followed, the sound of paper tearing. Pick it up! The ape noises from the back row. Take your nappy-headed self back to whatever welfare line you crawled out of. And then his voice on the radio calling the MPs, describing her as a security threat, requesting her removal, all of it recorded, all of it time-stamped. Colonel Drake put his head in his hands. The provost marshal closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. One of the junior officers in the room had to leave. He came back 3 minutes later with red around his eyes. The recording changed everything. This wasn't a he said, she said situation. This was evidence. Undeniable, documented, permanent. And it didn't stop there. Investigators pulled Henderson's full service record. What they found was a pattern so clear it could have been drawn with a ruler. 3 formal complaints, 2 from black soldiers, 1 from a Latino soldier, all filed within an 18-month window, all describing the same behavior: racial slurs during drills, targeted punishment for soldiers of color, public humiliation designed to break spirits, not build discipline. Every single complaint had been reviewed by the same 2 supervising officers, Major Gerald Boone and Captain Russell Price. Both had signed off on dismissals. Both had written the same phrase in their reports: insufficient evidence. Complainant may be exhibiting sensitivity to standard training environment. The same phrase, word for word, 3 times. Investigators contacted the former soldiers who had filed complaints. 2 agreed to provide new statements immediately. The third, Corporal Darnell Hayes, who had been quietly discharged 6 months after filing his complaint, was harder to find. When they finally reached him, he was working at an auto repair shop in Killeen, Texas, 40 minutes from Fort Davis. He had been a promising non-commissioned officer, top marks in his unit, commendations from 2 previous postings. Then he reported Henderson, and within 6 months, he was out. Discharged for failure to adapt to military environment. His statement was 4 pages long. He had been waiting 2 years to give it. Charges were filed under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The list was long, and it was heavy. Sergeant First Class Craig Henderson, conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer, dereliction of duty, violation of equal opportunity regulations, abuse of authority, willful disobedience of a superior commissioned officer. Private First Class Dylan Tate, conduct unbecoming, accessory to harassment and discrimination. The 2 MPs involved in the unlawful search were formally reprimanded and reassigned to administrative duties pending further review. Major Boone and Captain Price, the officers who buried the complaints, were placed under immediate investigation for dereliction of duty and obstruction. The court-martial proceedings took place 3 weeks later. Military press covered every day. By the 2nd week, national news outlets picked up the story. The headlines wrote themselves. Army general racially abused on her own base, then revealed who she was. Fort Davis sergeant called black woman a monkey. She was his commanding general. Pentagon-ordered inspection exposes years of racial abuse at Texas military base. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording alone would have been enough. But combined with Sutton's testimony, the prior complaints, Hayes's statement, and the documented pattern of cover-ups, there was nowhere to hide. Henderson was found guilty on all counts. The sentence? Reduction in rank to private. Forfeiture of all pay and allowances, 18 months confinement, dishonorable discharge from the United States Army. When the verdict was read, Henderson didn't react. He sat in his chair with his hands flat on the table and stared at a point on the wall just above the judge's head. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. Henderson didn't move, didn't blink, like someone had pulled the plug and the machine just stopped running. Tate received a reduction in rank and 6 months confinement. He cried when the sentence was read, quietly, head down, shoulders shaking. The tough kid who had made ape sounds on a training field couldn't hold it together in a courtroom. Major Boone was relieved of command. Captain Price was stripped of his position and transferred pending discharge review. 2 men who thought burying complaints was easier than confronting racism learned that paper trails don't stay buried forever. The Secretary of Defense issued a public statement condemning the behavior at Fort Davis and announcing a department-wide review of harassment complaint procedures across all branches. Lorraine gave one press statement: short, measured, no anger, no victory lap. "I didn't go to Fort Davis looking for a fight. I went looking for the truth. Unfortunately, the truth found me first." 6 months later, Fort Davis looked like a different base. New leadership, new protocols. Mandatory bias and inclusion training for every officer and recruit. A completely restructured complaint system with independent oversight. No more complaints disappearing into the filing cabinets of sympathetic superiors. The changes weren't cosmetic. They were structural, the kind that gets written into policy manuals and enforced with consequences. Colonel Drake kept his position but operated under a new framework. He requested the oversight himself, told the Pentagon he didn't want to be the next man who missed what was happening under his own roof. Corporal Darnell Hayes, the soldier who was quietly discharged 2 years ago for daring to tell the truth, received a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. He was underneath a Ford F-150 at the auto shop when his phone rang. Grease on his hands, sweat on his forehead. The kind of life a man lives when the system chews him up and spits him out. The call was from the Department of the Army. Full reinstatement. Back pay for 24 months. A formal written apology signed by the base commander and the Secretary of the Army. Hayes didn't say anything for a long time. The man on the other end of the line asked if he was still there. He said yes. Then he hung up, sat on the bumper of that Ford, and cried for the first time in 2 years. He reported for duty 3 weeks later. Clean uniform, fresh haircut, shoulders back. The soldiers who greeted him at the gate didn't know his story yet, but they would. Private Elise Sutton, the recruit who stepped forward when everyone else stepped back, was commended for moral courage under pressure. She received an early promotion and was accepted into an Army Leadership Development Program at Fort Benning. She packed her bags at Fort Davis without ceremony. No party, no speech, just a quiet nod from Collins in the hallway and a handshake that lasted a beat longer than regulation. On her last night, she sat on the edge of her bunk and wrote a letter, not to anyone in particular, just to herself. A promise that the next time she saw something wrong, she wouldn't wait to be brave. She'd start there. Back at the Pentagon, Lorraine Moore returned to her routine. Same early mornings, same pressed uniform, same black coffee in a plain white mug, same stack of folders waiting on her desk. But there was one new thing, a framed photograph on the corner of her desk. Not the old one, the one with the Secretary of Defense at a formal dinner. That one had been moved to the shelf behind her. The new photo was simpler, smaller. Lorraine standing next to Darnell Hayes on the day of his reinstatement ceremony. Both in uniform, both at attention. Neither of them smiling. They didn't need to. The photograph said everything their faces didn't. Lorraine picked up the first folder from her stack. Another base, another report, another set of names and complaints and patterns waiting to be uncovered. She opened it, started reading, pen in hand, notebook beside her. The work wasn't done. It was never done. But every time someone stood where she stood, calm, steady, unwilling to break, the cracks in the system got a little wider, and a little more light got in. So here's my question for you, and I'm not asking it to be cute. I actually want to know. If you were standing in Lorraine's shoes that morning, on that field with those words ringing in your ears and 40 people watching, would you have revealed who you were right away? Would you have shut it down in the first 10 seconds? Or would you have done what she did? Stayed quiet, let them show you exactly who they were, and then made sure they could never do it again? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to read every single one. And if this story hit you somewhere, if it made you angry or made you think or reminded you of something you've seen or lived through, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Because the next story, trust me, even crazier.
Henderson, his honorable discharge, Tate, 6 months confinement, the officers who buried those complaints gone, and Daniel Hayes, the soldier they threw away for telling the truth, reinstated, full back pay, written apology. But here's the thing that won't leave my head. When it all came crashing down, Henderson said, "If I had known who you were, I would have been respectful." And Noreen said, 5 words back, "Respect shouldn't require a rank." That's the whole story right there. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he did it to someone who had the power to hold him accountable. And that's the real question this story asks. Not whether racism exists. We know it does. The question is, what happens when the person you dehumanize has no star, no title, no recording? What happens when there's no Noreen Moore in the room? That's silence. That's the answer most of people are afraid of. So I want to ask you something and sit with it before you answer. Is respect something people earn from you, or is it something people lose? Drop that in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't, because the next story even crazier. And remember, how you treat people who can do nothing for you says everything about who you are.